Hello! It's been a while since my last internet appearance, and you guys might be wondering why I disappeared all of a sudden last year. Well, without getting into too much detail, I've just been busy with IRL stuff, and frankly got bored of making content a year ago, which is why I did what I did and deleted my channel. I just wanted to carry on with a normal life and see where that took me. That all changed when I went on vacation and met two people on two different occasions in two different parts of Europe who both watched and enjoyed my Truth About Hunter Avalon video. And keep in mind, I'm not political IRL, so these encounters were initially normie, in the sense that we either met at a party or they were friends of a friend of mine. But these conversations, they gradually escalated into conversations about online politics, which included relatively esoteric stuff relative to, contemporary conversations in the real world. Stuff like the Groyper Wars, which then led to conversations about different content creators, and you get the picture. Long story short, this pretty much fired me up to create more content, and here we are now. For the most part, my disappearance can be best described as sort of a self-imposed exile from the online sphere, though I have been out and about during the exile. For example, when I debated What's-His-Face on Politically Provoked, or when I helped debate Prep Kai on the Xander Hall debate, for example, but those were pretty minor. Anyway, the point now is that I'm back, and making as much content as I possibly can. Enjoy! Over the past 2 decades, the term science denier has been a very popular pejorative to describe conservatives, Republicans, and anyone even remotely right-leaning, particularly in discussions involving climate change or transgenderism. But how accurate is that statement? Starting off with the literature on authority figures and blind trust, there's evidence to suggest that conservatives are actually against science worship rather than the science itself. Monadol 2019 looked at GSS data between 1973 and 2016 and found these results. As you can see, conservatives are more anti-scientist than anti-science, as conservatives generally agree that science benefits society, and these attitudes have been stable over the course of 43 years. But increasingly, they do not trust the people running the scientific community. In other words, they're okay with empirical evidence and its benefits, but disapprove of the whole quote-unquote trust the experts mantra. On the topic of science worship, Hugveen et al. 2022, looking at over 10,000 people from 24 different countries, found that atheists were more likely to believe nonsensical statements if they came from a scientist rather than a spiritual guru. Finally, on the topic of conspiracy theories, the evidence also shows a lack of a correlation between conservatism and the likelihood of believing in conspiracy theories, as liberals and conservatives are similarly likely to believe in different conspiracy theories if you look at Figure 1. In this part of the video, I'll primarily be looking at the literature which pertains to the relationship between political alignment and the ability to interpret data in an unbiased manner. Starting off, Ditto et al. Performed a meta-analysis of 51 experimental studies involving over 18,000 participants. They primarily examined, quote, the tendency to evaluate otherwise identical information more favorably when it supports one's political beliefs or allegiances than when it challenges those beliefs or allegiances. They also adjusted for publication bias, and their final results found that liberals and conservatives showed no real difference in mean levels of bias across studies. By the way, there might be a chance of someone linking the response to this paper as a quote-unquote debunk, and to that all I can say is that they've addressed all their criticisms in a subsequent paper, so yeah. The next study comes from Washburn and Skitka 2017 that looked at over 1,000 people. They concluded with the quote, both liberals and conservatives engaged in motivated interpretation of study results and denied the correct interpretation of those results when that interpretation conflicted with their attitudes. Now then, this part of the video is for me to shed light on liberal bias or liberal science denial. Liberal bias comes from a dogmatic dedication to egalitarianism and blank slate theory, which also makes liberals prone to being very anti-white. A study by Jost, Nosek, and Gosling 2008 found liberals to be a lot more egalitarian than conservatives. Now, you might be thinking that egalitarianism is something good because shouldn't everyone just be equal? Well, I agree, everyone should be equal under the law. However, when it comes to pure intrinsic differences, there is a lot of variance that exist both between and within groups. These differences in turn can lead to differences in outcomes, which liberals tend to perceive as the number one evidence of discrimination. Take the wage gap between racial groups, for example. On the surface, it may look like discrimination because even after you control for a bunch of confounding variables, a gap still remains. However, if you, for example, add IQ into that model, because blacks and whites differ in average IQ, the gap reverses. Now, this is only one example, but liberals tend to believe that every single disparity we see today is due to some sort of discrimination, especially when it comes to gender and racial disparities. The main reason they believe that is obviously because they don't believe in variance between and within groups, and this blank slate theory can really warp their way of thinking. And the data also seems to substantiate my point pretty well. Krijnen et al. 2020 looked at over 1,000 people and found that a more conservative political ideology was associated with a more meritocratic belief where the economy rewards talent and hard work, whereas a more liberal ideology was associated with believing that the economy was rigged in favor of high status groups as well as random and unpredictable. Another study by Clark 2019 compiles a list of multiple studies showing that liberals show a lot of bias when it comes to studies involving minorities. In other words, they tend to either overlook or minimize studies that make minorities look bad. This mindset is very dangerous as it paves the way for a more anti-white way of thinking. What I mean by that is that they're so deluded into believing that minorities can do no wrong that they tend to be very out of touch when it comes to real-life racial disparities that make minorities look bad. An example of this comes from Goldberg 2022, who analyzed two major datasets on white liberals. White liberals tend to rate whites as more violent than blacks, as well as lazier than blacks, which is completely contradicted by real-world data. So here are the three main takeaways of the video. Number 1, both liberals and conservatives tend to blindly follow authority, albeit different ones. Second, when it comes to purposely misrepresenting and misinterpreting data to fit one's narrative, both sides tend to do it equally, so no one side has a monopoly on it. And the final part of the video just sheds light into what liberal bias is, which is a form of radical blank slate egalitarianism, which can poison one's mindset into believing that disparities are discrimination, which they usually apply to race. And when that happens, it tends to be very anti-white, as these disparities always lead to discussions about whites being oppressors and all those things, all while minorities can do no wrong. And that's the video. If you like what you see, then make sure to subscribe and give it a thumbs up and give it a share. And also follow me on my Telegram, as I tend to do a lot of live streams with Sean Last and the Alt-Hype if you're into that kind of stuff.